Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is D.K. Bhattacharya and we'll be talking about tool types and techniques of Mesolithic period. It will be very interesting for you to know that the word Mesolithicum or Mesolithic was given in India by a man called Carlyle in 1880 when he was looking at the cave paintings etc. of the Mirzapur region. So in 1800s, the word Mesolithic was identified as related to small pieces of stones called microliths. For a large number of people in Western Europe at that time, Mesolithic was not identified as a cultural phase. Mesolithic was not identified as having a distinct period or a phase, and people used to take Paleolithic to be followed by Neolithic. The intervening period of Mesolithic was identified by Carlyle in the Mirzapur caves, Sohaga cave that was. Even then, the tools were so insignificant, the tools were so small little chips of stone that people could never accept that they could be the main implement of survival strategy for a group of people as late in time as early Holocene. Because in the preceding period they used to have such beautiful tools as upper Paleolithic tools or the lower Paleolithic beautiful hand axes and middle Paleolithic beautiful points and so on. And suddenly these small little chips of stones being the main implement of survival brought in a kind of skepticism in the archaeological world. Then they address the issue in a more categorical manner and they say, if they are belonging to a cultural period, in what way are they more advantageous than the preceding cultural period? Now it was argued that number one, they are more advantageous in the way that they produce more sharp borders out of let us say 1 pound of stone. If I take 1 pound of stone in a lower Paleolithic period, I can create 6 plus 6, 12 inches of sharp border. In middle Paleolithic, I can create perhaps more flake tools and say I create about 30 or 40 flake tools, each having about 6 inches sharp border. But in upper Paleolithic also you can have about 50 to 60 large blades and you can have a larger number of sharp borders. In Mesolithic period, half a pound of stone can give you hundreds of microliths, and hundreds of microliths in their sharp border will be in thousands of centimeters, and therefore it is more advantageous. I repeat, the arguments were taken more categorically. Is microliths therefore a more advantageous technology as compared to the preceding culture where you are getting more sharp border out of the same amount of raw material? The answer is yes. The second, microliths per se cannot be used as a tool. They must have been hafted. They must have been hafted in suitable organic material to form arrows, spearheads, harpoons and so on. Now, once they are attached to organic material, then you enter into the mechanical advantage of what is known as mechanics. Power into power arm is equal to weight into weight arm, meaning thereby that if you have a handle which is long enough and you have couple of microliths attached to the anterior end of the handle, then you can create a larger power because of the length of the handle. Now this is the same technique which is used for lifting a truck by the machines of small amount, and the lifting is done by man manually, but the truck can be lifted. So this is called the law of mechanics, and law of mechanics shows you large amount of advantage that you have in creating microliths in a composite manner used on an organic handle. So this is again advantageous as compared to the preceding cultural period. The third point that was added was also very interesting. The lower Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic and upper Paleolithic tools, you create with so much of labor input in it, but they break in no time. And if they break, there is no replacement done. You have to make a new tool. But in microlith, the concept, the spare part concept is used. Suppose you have made a kind of an arrowhead or a harpoon by attaching large number of microliths into it, then if one microlith breaks, you take it out and put another one. So the concept of spare part is a third point of advantage that was taken as Mesolithic cultural advantage. So it was more or less proved, though in a common man's view, it looks still very insignificant as cultural material for a survival of early Holocene people in an advantageous manner. Why did they give up their beautiful tools and picked up these stupid looking small chips of flakes as flakes or blades as their main tool types of survival? The reasons that you are seeking are as follows. The beginning of Holocene was a very big climatic change. In fact, it is defined by change of climate. The definition of early Holocene is a remarkable change of climate. And the climate change brought in the first problem it brought in was all large mammals who were suited to cold climate or soggy climate were extinct or they migrated. When the large mammals migrated and the ecosystem developed large number of lakes, bogs, and waterways, and huge amount of storks and birds coming flocking there and to eat the fish. And now here your ecosystem, when your ecosystem was having large mammals, then you had different kind of tools good enough. But then now the large mammals are gone, you have to readapt your ecosystem, your toolkit to this new ecosystem. And you develop, and that's why the economy of early Holocene is also called fishing and fouling economy. That means your ecosystem being fish and fowl now, your resource retrieval strategy also has to be towards the fishes and the fowls. And if you have to kill the birds, you can't kill the bird with a hand axe. You can't kill the bird with a large tools, the Paleolithic period. You want to have a missile. How can you have a missile? Something which flies in the air unless you give up weight. Stone has a weight. So microliths therefore were invented specially so that they are light enough to fly in the air and they can be used as arrows and bows and so on to hit the birds or hit the fishes. So microliths were not a kind of cultural degeneration looking so small pieces, but they were specially adapted to hunting birds and fishes. Another thing which is very important is this: all throughout Paleolithic period, man has seen when there is a huge amount of air, some tornado or cyclone comes, all large trees bend down, and when the air is gone, the trees come back to the normal shape. So they identified that nature around also has their own elasticity. Nature has an elasticity. The trees have their own elasticity. They come back. And it's the first time man harnessed nature's elasticity to create a bow and arrow. And we have evidence of bow and arrow from the cave paintings in Levant in Europe, and you have cave paintings in Bhimbetka where bow and arrow with arrows with microlith in them is shown. So almost indirectly you can say, sir, Mesolithic period marks a different change in economy, and this change in economy required the creation of missiles. And to create missiles, for which we have evidence, we have confirmative evidence from the rock shelters and the cave painting. For that, he created these microliths. Having said as much, people started asking, how could these tiny flakes been taken out? Some people even said no. They used to take chalcedony, quartz, and such to crystalline rocks and heat them first. And after heating them, if you pressurize them from the top, small little blades come out. Sometimes 3 to 4 centimeter in length, 1 to 2 centimeter in breadth, and less than 1 centimeter in thickness. The beauty of microliths are they're very thin. They're very thin, sometimes half a centimeter or even less in thickness. So you know they will fly very well with that kind of weight. So a technique was adopted in which you create this series of tiny parallel-sided blades which are removed from a suitable core. A core needs to be prepared first, and this is removed in a serial manner, and this removing is done by pressure flaking technique. Pressure flaking technique has been identified as a technique which is similar to the way you will cut pencil in order to sharpen it. So the hammer is in constant touch with the core until the detachment takes place. That's pressure flaking technique. If you take them out in a series and the core becomes cylindrical and all along you have this kind of blade marks or blade beds, they look like the Greek pillars. You know, in Greek architecture, the pillars have grooves running along the length of the pillar, and they have been named in Greek architecture as fluted pillars or fluted columns, FTED, fluted columns. And we borrow the term from Greek architecture to refer to this technique as fluting technique. So fluting technique therefore refers to an adaptation of pressure flaking technique which is adapted in order to take out blades. So when you take out blades, you are using fluting technique. Fluting technique is a combination technique and primary fabrication is pressure flaking technique. Good enough. So you get large number of these blades taken out. Possibly somebody sits and takes out blades after blades after blade. I need to add one point here. When Carlyle and others accepted eventually that microlithic blades form the mainstay of Mesolithic culture, the name of the culture was enunciated for the first time as sandwiched between Paleolithic and Neolithic. They did not consider large stones in this. Today we know that this large amount of fluted blades are obtained well within Pleistocene in Upper Paleolithic period. And also they continue to be prepared within Neolithic, Chalcolithic and even later day hunter-gatherers of today. So this is a technique which keeps on coming all through, and it will be wrong to say that Mesolithic period has only microlithic blades. It is important to remember that there are many Mesolithic sites where we have found large amount of medium-shaped core tools and big core tools. So they are the macro component of microliths. You have a macro component of microliths coming from many sites. They have been not really looked at because Carlyle's time onward we have been looking at microliths as forming Mesolithic culture. It is not so. You go to the Wabinian culture, which of course goes up to Neolithic, chopper chopping continues with the microliths. So you have a situation where we have not accepted earlier, but we must keep in our mind that Mesolithic culture does not really necessarily mean all microlithic blades. There can be about 20%, sometimes 5%, sometimes 10% macro tools, which are usually broken fluted core made into a end scraper, broken fluted or fractured fluted core made into a kind of a push plane, and so on and so forth. Having said as much, we come back to the microlithic technology. All along our Paleolithic period and Upper Paleolithic especially, we have worked with the blades. Blades we know are flakes in which the length is more than or equal to twice the breadth. Now these blades have too much sharp border. You have a blade and you have a sharp border this side, sharp border that side. And the first time, not first time, even Upper Paleolithic we have seen it, you have a retouching done on the lateral border of a blade in order to blunt it. All along Lower Paleolithic, Middle Paleolithic, and even in Upper Paleolithic many sites, many types, you have been doing what is known as retouchings in order to sharpen or reinforce a border. And Microlithic period, the sharpening of the border is replaced by blunting of a border. So you take a microlith and you retouch it in order to blunt a border. Let us look at the microliths, the raw material of the microlith, and that is a long elongated blade with two parallel borders. We give it a name, and the name is very important because it is by fluting technique. We call it fluted blade, or we call it PS blade sometimes, meaning parallel sided blade. Now this we give it a name because we want to distinguish it from the Upper Paleolithic blades, which are done by punching technique. They are thick blades. They are not half a centimeter in thickness. They are thick blades, they are long big blades, broad blades, and they are done by punching technique, which is a modified technique of percussion. Now these blades are called Upper Paleolithic blades or punched blades, which are Upper Paleolithic, they are not microliths. Now the microlithic blades therefore needs to be given another name because both are blades. So because the word blade is common, we have to call them, because it's Mesolithic culture, that is Paleolithic culture, we have chosen the word PS blade or parallel sided blade. The best word will be fluted blade, a blade produced by fluting technique. Having taken the fluted blade, depending on what kind of ultimate weapon you have in your mind, that means do you want to make a harpoon, or do you want to make a arrow, or do you want to make a sickle? It depends on what you have in your mind. Depending on that, you give a particular kind of blunting of the border. Now suppose you take a blade and you attach the blade without any retouching into a kind of a wooden handle. So what happens is that when you use one sharpened border, the other sharp border being inside will get into the handle, and therefore you have to prevent it from getting into the handle by way of blunting that border. So the blunted border is the border which is hafted inside. People have been asking what did they heft with. It is usually argued that they must have been hefted with vegetable resins, the resins that come from big trees. They have been putting that in their mouth, the heat of the mouth, and of course the saliva. You keep biting it like chewing gum, eventually it becomes sticky, and that can be used as something which is like a resin in which the microliths could be embedded. We have no evidence from India about microliths found in an embedded position, but we have one evidence coming from Europe or Middle East, where they have been found embedded with bitumen. Bitumen is from petroleum product. So you know that petroleum product has been harvested by people from Mesolithic time, from the open faucets from which gas used to come out in Middle Asia. You have a lot of such places, and in the lip of the holes from where the gas comes out, there will be some deposit, and they will scrape that deposit as bitumen, and with bitumen as part of the fixture they have put the microliths in. Otherwise, we have no evidence so far from India where we can show microliths having been embedded in a particular resin form. But we have an evidence indirectly from the cave painting of Bhimbetka, where they are shown as embedded, the microliths having embedded in the shaft as a harpoon or as an arrow. Now, this microlith is a tool blank. This PS blade is a tool blank. It is still not a tool type because it has to be specifically retouched to become a tool type. The first retouching that you find is that it still remains rectangular in shape, but one of the border is blunted heavily, and then you call it a backed blade. We have backed blade in Upper Paleolithic also. But then we don't distinguish the two. Once we have said we're dealing with microlith, we are dealing with microliths. Then you have a second variety where the blunting is done in such a manner that the blade no longer remains rectangular in shape. The blunted border meets the sharp border at a wide angle. Now, the blunted border meets the sharp border at a right angle, it immediately becomes obliquely blunted blade. If you remember, in Aurignacian period and in Epipaleolithic period, we have a type called Azillion Point or shuttle Peronian knife. Now, these were types which broad blades in which one border is blunted, the other border is backed, but the backed border goes and meets the sharp border at a wide angle. And if they meet the sharp border at a low angle, then it becomes a point. It's no longer a knife. It meets it at a wide angle, it becomes a kind of obliquely blunted knife. So you have the second microlithic type, which is called obliquely blunted blade. Now, the raw material is a rectangular blade. So it depends on how you shape the rectangular blade. Then you have a very interesting type, and you cut the blade into the shape of a trapeze, and you blunt all the borders except the longest border. A trapeze have one border longest and the other two borders are slanting to meet a small border. Now, the sharp border is the longest, other three borders are blunted. A trapeze in French is called tranché petit. Tranché petit is a very interesting material which is possibly used as a transverse arrowhead. A transverse arrowhead is a very interesting arrowhead. I say interesting because it doesn't kill an animal. It cuts the wing, cuts the extremity of the animal. Now, that's a very important point. You don't want to kill an animal, but you want to still have the animal half dead with you. Why? Because you have already developed the concept of a tomorrow. This is the beginning of a psychic change towards acquisitive, from acquisitive to productive economy. You are psychologically now trying to have something which I can eat tomorrow. I don't have to eat today. Hunting means I have to eat today, because otherwise it will get putrefied tomorrow. So you have a very interesting type called tranché petit or a transverse arrowhead. Now, another type, which is you take again the rectangular blade in which you try to cut it and make two borders blunted in such a manner the shape is that of an isosceles triangle. And the shape of isosceles triangle is a triangle. Shape of stellene triangle is another triangle. So you have 3-4 varieties of triangles, and these triangles, not all, but isosceles triangle and trapeze, if in a microlithic group, Before I go to the other types, microlithic types, I must mention about a very interesting point. Archaeologists, especially those who are dealing with Mesolithic culture, has been always trying to differentiate two varieties of Mesolithic stages. Not that it is accepted all over, and these are the geometric microliths and the non-geometric microliths. And the geometric microliths are those assemblages of microliths, no matter what are the all types there, but even if there is one trapeze and one isosceles triangle, these are called geometric assemblage. And if there is an assemblage of hundreds of microliths, but there is no trapeze and no triangle, then you do call it non-geometric. The idea that they had in their mind is like this, that geometric microliths are the one which are the most evolved ones, and non-geometric microliths are the less evolved one, so they are closer to Upper Paleolithic. So they are trying to make a chronology of the two varieties of Mesolithic, but then it is not all over accepted. Before that, we have also to accept that there are a large number of flakes there that has been worked out into types in Microlithic period. These flakes are also microflakes, and they have worked out into borers, in thumbnail scrapers, which are mini type of what is Upper Paleolithic borer, or mini type of what is Upper Paleolithic end scraper. There is one group of type which of course developed in the late Epipaleolithic period, and that is called microburin. A small cylindrical thick blade is taken, and this blade, a notch is made. A notch is made in the medial region, and after the notch is made in the medial region, it is broken into two parts, and the part will have one facet which will be concave and the other facet will be the broken part. So a dihedral angle burin, which is referred to as microburin, is also created. There are many varieties of larger blades and smaller blades which have been worked into semicircular backing, and they are referred to as lunates. Obviously, in French they are called crescent, in English they are called lunates. Now these lunates are variedly used to be hafted in a concave handle. Some people believe that they may have been hafted to form what is known as a sickle. In a sickle, if they have a concave handle, and a sickle could be proved. You remember the early Neolithic period in Middle West Asia, we have places like Zagros Mountain where they used to collect wild barley from a huge expanse of wild growth of barley there. And you know, you can't keep on taking wild barley, it will cut your fingers. So they developed this kind of sickle to take wild barley, harvest wild barley without going for farming. So they were not Neolithic people, they were late Mesolithic people. They have not done farming, and they had the advantage of the lunates, and we have found these lunates hafted in a concave base. There are a large number of fluted cores in which you find blades taken from one axis and then blades taken from another axis. So you call them double based fluted cores. So you have classification of microlithic tool types in a large varieties of ways, but their manner of hefting does not refer to the typological analysis. When you do the typological analysis, we talk about the microliths per se. We count the number of lunates, number of transepatite, that is trapeze. We count them and do a kind of histogramic analysis of high lunate, less trapeze, and so on and so forth, in order to understand the kind of adaptational strategy a group of people may have used. There is one point that remains, however. Why did they require lunate? If I am arguing that this kind of microlithic adaptation was only meant for creating missiles to hunt birds or fishes, what was the burin doing there? What was the macrolunates doing there? Large flakes in which lunate-like backing has been done. Then we start seeing that they were very fond of eating mussels, shells, on the seashore, that is especially kitchen midden culture of European Mesolithic. And when you have a shell, it is important to have a method of opening this shell and take out the material from inside. Now, opening this shell is very difficult unless you have something to prise it open, and this prying open, the burin comes very handy. So you find that functionally speaking, many of these lower Mesolithic tool types can be explained away as a kind of adaptation, and a very simple adaptation to the ecosystem, which has now totally changed from the large mammals to the birds and fishes. If you try to see the excavated sites of Mesolithic period, We do not, however, find large amount of these fish bones or the bird bones. So it is important to remember that Mesolithic therefore is a very small transitional period, a very small transitional period where already some kind of collection of wild seed has started. Collection of wild seed, grinding stones where the seed was made into flour, made into flour, or the seeds were roasted as it is. So you have an activity which is more or less jumping into Neolithic very soon. So it is very difficult to say that Mesolithic is a pure hunting or pure fishing and fowling period. There are, however, areas like in northwest Europe where you find Mesolithic stayed for a longer period of time. Then you can say, sir, it is a pure Mesolithic. But in the Middle East and part of India, Mesolithic is a very small period of adaptation on a specific ecozones. We have a site called Bagur in Rajasthan, in Bhilwara district of Rajasthan. And here you have Mesolithic tools which are smaller than 1 centimeter in length. They're microliths, and they're all made on quartz. Quartz is a very difficult raw material to work with, and I'm sure quartz cannot be worked with pressure flaking technique. So there must be small pieces of flakes and blades that has been taken out, and very strong trapeze and triangle base sculpture created. And we have a date of 5000 BC, 5000 and some odd BC for this Mesolithic development. So it is not to be taken as common development all over India. Come to Sarai Naharai, you have a different kind of Mesolithic development. Here you find a Mesolithic tool embedded into the rib of a skeleton. So you know the Mesolithic tool must have penetrated the skin, the adipose tissues and the fat, and then gone and hit the bone, and the man must have died of septicemia because it got infected and so on. But the bone, inside the bone, you still have the microlith attached in it. So you find Mesolithic of one kind in the east, Mesolithic of another kind in Rajasthan, and Mesolithic of other kind in southern India. So you have development of various kinds of Mesolithic in India. Some are very long staying, some are very small duration staying. But the typological panorama of Mesolithic period are not very many. You have varieties of lunates, varieties of trapezes, varieties of obliquely blunted blades, and of course your backed blades galore. And they are added or are planted into or fixed into wooden handles, and ultimate what kind of tools have been made, you will never know, except for the painting of Bhimbedkar. Thank you.